In this video, let me talk about functions. Functions name pieces of code. For example, we can put a series of tasks that we want to perform in our code inside the function, and we'll be able to call that function every time we want to execute that code. Now we can declare a function by using the def keyword. So we can say def, and we can say print name, and we can simply print a name, let me say Jonathan, within this function. Now by doing so, we've declared that function. If we want to see this in action, what we need to do is to call this function. What I'm going to do is to say print name, just like we did for the print function. So when I save this, I'm going to open my terminal. I'm going to run this with Python. And when I call that, we see that our name has been printed to the console. Now Python functions take in arguments, just like we saw for the argument variables that we passed when we ran a file. We can also pass in arguments, and to provide an argument, let's close my terminal. I am going to create a function that takes in an argument. Now let's say we have our function that prints, let's say first name. Now when we pass in a function, we can pass in an argument. For example, first name would like to print, and after doing that, instead of printing just the name, we can just print that first name we passed through that function. Now we can call this by saying print first name, then we provide the first name. Let me say Jonathan. Now to run this, I am going to print functions.py, and you see that our second function runs and prints our name that we provided as an argument. Let's create another function. Let me first comment this. I'm going to create a function. Let me call this total. And when I create this function, I can add in other numbers. For example, I can say number 1 and number 2 and number 3. Like this. So I can make this function print the total. So I can say the total can be n1 plus n2 plus n3. So when I call this function, call functions by using these double brackets, I can pass in my arguments. For example, 2, 3, 4, and there are only 3 arguments I'm passing. So if I save this and run it, so I'll say Python functions.py. This is going to add our arguments 2 plus 3, 5, and 4, that's 9. Let's also look at functions taking a lot of arguments. Now we can write a function that you can pass in an infinite number of arguments. So we do this by declaring the function. I'll say def, let's say def total. So I can say star args. When I do this, this means I can pass in as many arguments as I want to this function. So I can print args. So let me save this, and I can call this function. So I can say def total, then I can put in as many arguments as I want. Save this. I'm going to run this file. So when I run this file, I see that it returns a all the arguments I've passed in. I'll clear this. After clearing this, I can even say that we want to print the sum of all the arguments. Let's try this. When I open my terminal and run functions.py, we see that it's not returned because we haven't yet called this function. So let me call this. So I'm going to say total, and I provide the arguments. So I'm going to provide 12, 34, 25, and so on. So this is going to add all of our arguments and return the total of all the arguments. Now you realize I'm using another function called a sum function. What it does is to print the sum of everything we pass through it. For example, we passed in our arguments, which we provided as arguments to the total function. Now it's printing the sum of all the arguments that we passed in. We can also keep variables inside of functions and be able to prompt them dynamically from users. For example, I can say def, let me say give information. So I will call this function give info, and then let's prompt a user for their name, their age. Now we can say that print your name, and then I'll use an f string for this. So I'm going to put an f, put the name. And I'll do the same for the age. So I'll provide an f string in this case. So I'll say your age is, and I put the age. Now then I'll come and prompt a user for their name. So I'll say I'll actually just first call this function with the argument. So I'll pass in the name. We'll say Jonathan, and then I'll pass in the age as 22. Save. So when I run this, we're going to see that it's going to print your name is Jonathan and your age is 22. So let's try doing this again for another task. So we have a small function that calculates the area of a square. So we may pass in def area. Well, we know that square has equal sides, so we may pass in the length of one side. So we can say side, and then we can say print. Then we can pass in an f string. So I can say print area of square with side of, then we can pass in our side. So I can say side units, then we pass in our area. So I'll say side times the side. So our function should be able to return the area of any square that we may pass in. So if I say area, let me pass 2, and then say area, I pass 4, let me say area, I pass, let me say 6. So when I save this, it should be printing areas of 3 squares. So I'm going to pull out my terminal and run. So we see that it's going to print output for different inputs. For cases that we do not want to just print the output of a function, we may instead just return that output, and we do that by using the return keyword. So let's try that. I'm going to comment this. I'm going to create a simple function. I'm going to call auto, and let it take an infinite number of arguments. So I'll pass in args, and then instead of returning print, I'm going to use the return keyword. All I'm going to do is to say sum the args. Now instead of just printing, I'll instead print an f string. So I'll say the sum of many args is, then I'll just pass in the function. So I'm just going to say going to be total. I'll pass in the args I want to pass. So let me say 45, 45, 45, then 45. So when I save this and run it, we're going to see that it's going to return the total, this, but we have not necessarily printed it in our function.